Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I wish everyone an enjoyable listening experience. Today, the book I'll be discussing is The Man Who Knew, The Life and Times of Alan Greenspan. This book is a biography of Alan Greenspan, and I'm here to share its essence with you. Although more than a decade has passed since the 2008 global financial crisis, the discussions it sparked have not faded away. Instead, they continue to draw the attention of policymakers, the markets, and academia for two main reasons. One reason is the growing path dependence caused by the monetary policies implemented during the crisis. Ben Bernanke, who served as the chairman of the Federal Reserve from 2006 to 2014, gained fame for boldly implementing quantitative easing policies, which effectively rescued the U.S. economy in the short term. This success led to the more resolute implementation of large-scale quantitative easing policies by Jerome Powell, the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, during the 2020 COVID-19 crisis. At least at the time, these policies appeared effective. The other reason is the lingering negative spillover effects of these policies. Excessive money supply continued to ferment in financial markets for several years. Low and negative interest rates fueled the expansion of financial institutions, businesses, and residents' balance sheets, setting the stage for potential risks of high indebtedness and leverage, which could lead to a severe economic downturn. This significant impact clearly exceeded the expectations of many. In his book, Crashed: How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World, British economist and historian Adam Tooze views the 2008 global financial crisis as the first crisis of the globalization era, and believes that this crisis may be far from over. Therefore, like the Great Depression in the United States from 1929 to 1933, the historical details and the truth described by various scholars about this crisis are still waiting to be explored. Understanding the monetary policies during the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 COVID-19 crisis requires more evidence, making it essential to delve into the historical context and narrative details. The unique structure of the Federal Reserve ensures that its policymakers have a strong personal influence, but their mistakes can also have significant repercussions. Looking at it now, the normalization of monetary policy by central banks in Europe and the United States since 2008 has been full of twists and turns. Ben Bernanke's policy direction has also become controversial, despite winning the 2022 Nobel Prize in Economics for his research on bank crises and his reputation for crisis management. As a result, many have gradually forgotten Alan Greenspan, who presided over the Federal Reserve for 19 years from 1987 to 2006. Scholars and markets typically perceive Bernanke as having a strong academic background, heavily relying on data models, while Greenspan was more pragmatic and leaned towards practical experience. The book, Greenspan's Folly, by Sebastian Mallaby, a senior fellow for international economics at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former editor of the Financial Times, presents a more authentic and comprehensive portrait of the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. Greenspan was not just a central banker but also a theorist and a politician. His solid economic theories and political experience continue to make him an influential figure in the realm of monetary policy. Revisiting Greenspan not only helps us understand the real workings of central banks, monetary policy, and macroeconomics but also assists in eliminating biases and misconceptions, offering a more comprehensive and objective understanding of the man and his ideas. In 1999, Greenspan remarked that we really don't know how the monetary system works. This statement, in the author's view, carries a hint of sophistry. After reading this book, you may gain a clearer understanding of the current circumstances and a deeper insight into Greenspan's ideological principles. We will introduce this book in the following aspects. 1. Reassessing the real significance of Greenspan. 2. The possibility of over-reliance on free markets leading to mistakes. 3. Greenspan's policy legacy. 4. The increasing importance of central bank institutional development. Let's start by looking at the first part, re-evaluating the real significance of Alan Greenspan. In recent years, the sustained impact of the global pandemic has given rise to several waves in the field of economics. Initially, the focus was on Greenspan's predecessor, Paul Volcker, serving from 1979 to 1987, a legendary figure known for his efforts to combat high inflation in the United States during the 1980s. His two books, Changing Fortunes and Keeping at It, demonstrated his determination. It's undeniable that the high inflation that gradually emerged in European and American countries after the 2020 COVID-19 crisis led people to reminisce about the inflationary era of the 1980s, sparking a resurgence of interest in Volcker among scholars and in the markets, with numerous interpretations and writings. Simultaneously, Bernank's image as a firefighter took on new dimensions, especially reaching its peak after he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2022. However, the ongoing 3-year COVID-19 crisis prompted people to re-evaluate the achievements of Volcker and Bernanke, while discussions about Greenspan remained relatively subdued. Instead, some criticisms emerged, attaching various unrealistic labels to him, and people's assessments of him gradually trended toward mediocre. However, the historical experiences provided in this book counter these labels positively. During Greenspan's 19-year tenure, the United States only experienced 2 mild recessions, making it the longest period of economic growth in history. When examining Greenspan's monetary policy practices, it is evident that he successfully guided the United States through various crises, such as the 1989–1992 U.S. credit crisis, the 1990–1991 Gulf War crisis, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, and the 2001 dot-com bubble crisis, through flexible monetary policy operations. From a real-world perspective, the 2008 financial crisis placed Greenspan's monetary policy in a dilemma. Although Greenspan's monetary policy tended to be conservative and cautious, there is controversy over whether the consequences of the financial crisis should be entirely attributed to Greenspan. The context at the time was not just the result of monetary policy, it was the combined result of economic prosperity, credit expansion, and a relaxation of regulatory systems. Excessive financial innovation ultimately shattered the fragile financial system, and the subprime crisis quickly led to the collapse of the U.S. financial markets, with these crises being as severe as the U.S. Great Depression and even surpassing the challenges of that era. Greenspan, who endorsed financial derivatives innovation, ultimately faced a backlash due to regulatory relaxation, but whether this outcome can be entirely attributed to him still requires a detailed examination of historical details. The book mentions Greenspan's explanation during his open questioning by the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008. Greenspan believed that the root cause of this crisis lay in the failure of Wall Street's risk models and a misplaced trust in banks and other institutions. Greenspan's lessons are profound. Blindly relying on data models and relaxing regulation for profit-oriented financial institutions is clearly not the stance of financial regulators. Markets can malfunction, and financial institutions have an incentive to exploit regulatory arbitrage. It's not difficult to see that there is a very delicate relationship between financial innovation and financial regulation. On the one hand, financial innovation requires the guidance of financial regulation, sometimes necessitating the creation of a lenient, open, and free environment for financial innovation. On the other hand, without up-to-date regulation or keeping up with financial innovation, it is likely to become a laissez-faire troublemaker. The trust crisis and criticism that Greenspan faced towards the end of his tenure were largely related to this issue. Therefore, the book raises questions from that time. Do those in power prioritize the interests of regulatory agencies and their shareholders over their own when presented with lucrative opportunities? These persistent criticisms damaged Greenspan's reputation and professional contributions. The author objectively acknowledges that it was largely due to his early empirical training at New York University that he focused more on data rather than fallible economic models, thus avoiding the arrogance in mathematics that some later economists exhibited. At least from today's perspective, Greenspan's understanding of the relationship between markets and the real economy is also correct, and his concern about the threat of low inflation and the drive for productivity gains remains highly relevant. However, Greenspan eventually faced the harshest criticism of his career due to his indifference to shadow banking and financial innovation. Let's continue with the second part, the potential pitfalls of excessive faith in free markets. The formulation and adjustment of monetary policy is an extremely challenging task. Both the former chairman Paul Volcker and his successor Ben Bernanke acknowledged in their writings the fact that judgment based on experience and predictions from data models cannot guarantee complete certainty. Even though they ultimately succeeded in combating high inflation and stabilizing the markets, the policies they implemented carried inherent risks. Ben Bernanke believed that the low interest rates and loose monetary policies implemented during his tenure in 2008 had an experimental nature. There was no prior experience to draw from, and the outcome of this policy experiment was proven successful during specific periods. In fact, this experience served as a template for Jerome Powell in rescuing the crisis during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. However, can one conclude that the value orientation and framework of monetary policy can be set in stone based on this? The answer is likely negative. American economist Hyman Minsky, in his book Stabilizing an Unstable Economy, A Financial Instability Hypothesis, argued that in the face of a severe recession, lenders must intervene rapidly to ensure refinancing is available to prevent financial distress from evolving into a mutually reinforcing and accumulating recession that can lead to a Great Depression. However, these interventions also come at a cost, including the outbreak of inflation, and the instability triggered to prevent a Great Depression is also a side effect. From a financial stability perspective, monetary policy has the effectiveness of rescuing the economy from financial crises, but the negative effects of the policy cannot be ignored. Here, it is necessary to clarify two misconceptions. Firstly, some studies mistakenly believe that data models have strong empirical value, and relying on data models to guide monetary policy is more reliable. To some extent, due to the complexity of macroeconomics, the changing nature of various factors and their network effects, it is challenging to implement monetary policy operations solely based on empirical judgment. Secondly, the operational aspect of monetary policy has strong short-term effects. In simple terms, it has a practical aspect. Based on the economic conditions of a specific period, policy implementation requires rich empirical research, and policy supply must be supported by real demand. Furthermore, the transmission of monetary policy relies on real-world logic. This leads to an important research disagreement: how to understand quantitative research and qualitative analysis. Looking at the academic or practical backgrounds of various former Federal Reserve chairmen, both academic and market-oriented approaches have their merits and can be effective at different times. Even Greenspan, although he emphasized data models to some extent during his tenure, it's difficult to formulate practical monetary policy if data contains errors or even mistakes. Figures like Volcker and Bernanke, monetary policy makers, did not have historical experience to refer to when facing unprecedented high inflation or financial crises, and data models could also fail. In such situations, taking decisive action rather than solely relying on models or experience might prove more effective. Therefore, in this regard, the judicious decision-making in monetary policy is crucial. Greenspan, however, was criticized for his delayed response. In a sense, even if Greenspan had access to more comprehensive data, he might have opted for conservative policies. The book describes Greenspan's personality as one who was not simply a believer in the efficient market hypothesis but frequently raised concerns about the risks of financial innovation. However, based on his economic libertarianism, Greenspan refused to strengthen regulation and overly relied on the efficiency of the markets, showing excessive trust in financiers. The author refers to him as a non-Keynesian, even though Greenspan's era was filled with the New Deal progressive ideology. Greenspan did not embrace this trend and instead leaned towards libertarianism. The book chronicles Greenspan's academic journey during his time at New York University from a microacademic environment perspective. Scholars at the NYU Business School believed that Keynesian views led to business cycle recessions. They favored combating downturns with budget deficits and printing money, but such radical measures would only exacerbate economic volatility. Greenspan took statistical courses, consulted various technical literature on data cyclicality, and used a slide rule and a desktop calculator to organize this data. It was based on these early academic experiences and the influence of the academic environment that Greenspan became an empiricist hijacked by econometrics. Later, Greenspan also studied mathematical statistics at Columbia University, which is why, during his tenure as chairman of the Federal Reserve, he firmly believed that the quality of economists' data was more important than the sophistication of their models. Understanding this, one can see why Greenspan exhibited certain seemingly perplexing behaviors when dealing with financial crises, and why he adhered to his ideological theoretical system. Greenspan mentioned in his memoirs that the philosophy of free competition is more profound and alluring. This may be a key reason why a former chairman of the Federal Reserve who had an excessive faith in free markets made policy mistakes. Let's continue with the third part, Greenspan's policy legacy. The author attempts to trace the formation of Greenspan's ideological concepts through his academic career and family life, which both shaped and eventually tarnished his reputation. From the extensive historical narrative in this book, it becomes clear that Greenspan was a unique figure, and what sets him apart reflects the historical context of the American economy at the time and the debates among different schools of thought. When discussing Greenspan's policy legacy, it's essential not to overlook his early research on financial markets, asset prices, and the wealth effect. For example, in his research on investment portfolios, Greenspan discovered that by allowing individuals to construct portfolios based on their risk preferences, a complex and mature financial system reduced the cost of citizens' savings. The ultimate result was a decrease in the cost of capital, driving economic prosperity. In further exploring the relationship between asset prices and investments, Greenspan introduced the concept of the consumption sector. He believed that if the returns on investment portfolios persisted over a period of time, consumers might perceive them as a form of permanent additional income, leading to corresponding increases in their daily spending. This idea was later widely disseminated as the wealth effect. In 1959, while researching futures market trading, Greenspan realized that market prices did not entirely reflect economic fundamentals, at least not in the short term. It was often the in-person bidding, gestures, and instinctual behavior of market participants that influenced their decisions. As his research deepened, Greenspan recognized that market panic could occur faster than the building of investor confidence and have a more significant impact. These findings are worth noting. Greenspan staunchly opposed monetary expansion and even displayed a kind of aversion to the excessive use of money. This viewpoint was heavily influenced by the prominent figure of the monetarist school, Milton Friedman. Friedman believed that excessive money creation led to instability and recommended that central banks set monetary growth targets matching output growth. During Greenspan's early tenure as chairman of the Federal Reserve in the early 1980s, he preferred stabilizing the economy through flexible interest rate adjustments and asset purchases rather than pursuing an overly aggressive monetary policy. Indeed, Greenspan effectively used monetary policy tools multiple times to achieve lower inflation targets and maintain extended periods of economic stability. During Richard Nixon's presidency, Greenspan gradually moved from the periphery of monetary policy decision-making to the inner circle, participating in Nixon's economic policies alongside free market scholars like Friedman. In 1970, the Nixon team began to push for financial modernization. However, in 1971, Nixon personally terminated the Bretton Woods system and abandoned the gold standard, which was in stark contrast to Greenspan's steadfast belief in the gold standard. Greenspan consistently opposed price controls and supported the relaxation of financial regulations. Given the prevailing circumstances at the time, with a highly inefficient financial system, financial institutions were isolated from each other, and the rapid rise of the money market, as well as the acceleration of deposit outflows, pushed deposit and loan institutions toward diversification, competing with banks. This not only lowered the cost of credit but also retained more funds. The author suggests that Greenspan's hesitance to assume regulatory responsibilities during his tenure as chairman of the Federal Reserve may be related to the determinism of the Nixon era. Greenspan firmly believed that, by nature, regulation hindered the free operation of markets. However, if left unchecked, financial institutions would not self-correct, potentially leading to unforeseen financial crises. Greenspan's support for aiding banks during crises was evident in the various measures taken. In specific bank rescue actions, Greenspan believed that different banks required varying amounts of buffer capital. He advocated that banks should retain more of their own capital, showing his belief in the importance of regulatory relaxation. This perspective remained effective, even into the early stages of the 2008 financial crisis. The author also points out that, in the absence of clear evidence, Greenspan was more inclined to make judgments that favored bankers. However, this very perspective allowed for the proliferation of various financial innovations leading up to 2008, with financial regulation turning a blind eye to them. It wasn't until the subprime mortgage crisis erupted that the housing market encountered panic, ultimately leading to the crisis. Greenspan's deeply ingrained neoliberal perspective left him seemingly helpless when the crisis broke out. In contrast, Bernank's earlier research on banking crises was more profound, enabling him to take swift rescue measures after the crisis, primarily focusing on restoring market confidence and injecting substantial liquidity support. Based on their academic and professional backgrounds, Greenspan emphasized precision in economic data analysis in his early career. However, real-world developments often exceeded policy expectations. Even now, despite the Federal Reserve's wealth of data analysis tools, the forward-looking guidance they provide may still be fallible, as evidenced by Jerome Powell's transitory inflation argument. On the other hand, Bernanke, while also valuing data models, was not inflexible. Let's introduce the last part of the book, which emphasizes the importance of central bank institutional development. From another perspective, Bernanke places particular emphasis on the issue of transparency in monetary policy decision-making, which differs significantly from Greenspan's advocacy of vague policies. In his book, Bernanke on the Great Depression, Lessons for the Current Crisis, Bernanke dedicates a separate chapter to systematically analyze the non-monetary effects of financial crises during the Great Depression. He argues that macroeconomics generally assumes that individual behavior in the economy is rational, yet during the Great Depression, the economy was evidently inefficient, creating a contradiction. Bernanke drew lessons from this historical episode during the 2008 global financial crisis. He took a proactive stance in supporting the Federal Reserve's rescue of large banks, rather than allowing them to go bankrupt. He advocated injecting liquidity into the banking system to maintain financial stability and stimulate the economy's return to normalcy. However, Greenspan had limitations in his understanding of financial stability. In the mid-1990s, the U.S. financial markets experienced turmoil, but it quickly passed. Based on this experience, Greenspan began to overlook the fragility of the financial system. In hindsight, while Greenspan's long-term tenure maintained low inflation levels and low policy rates, it facilitated financial expansion, laying the groundwork for later financial instability. As a central banker who adheres to logical positivism and objective liberalism, Greenspan reiterated in his memoirs that a completely free and competitive market is a beneficial force. However, the reality is that financial markets are not populated by perfectly rational actors, but rather are rife with speculation and arbitrage. Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz points out that because market participants do not have access to complete information, market functioning is imperfect and often harmful to people's interests. Financial innovation is beneficial in certain periods and can promote economic growth and prosperity. However, when unregulated or lacking proper constraints, complex financial systems become vulnerable. Hyman Minsky believed that as long as financial markets are part of the investment decision mechanism, there will be inherent internal instability. Banks, whose lending activities are mainly based on debt financing, bank finance, seek to enrich their capital through debt financing business. As a profit-driven industry operating in an uncertain environment, this behavior inevitably increases the pressure for imbalances, leading to financial instability. Minsky suggested two approaches. One was to set certain limits on bank leverage, controlling the growth of bank owners' equity to a level compatible with inflation-free economic growth. The other was to guide and regulate financial innovation activities, ensuring that banks maintain a certain level of capital adequacy through setting different capital weightings for different asset categories. The author points out that Greenspan was more inclined to let the market self-regulate against risks, without using monetary policy to curb asset bubbles or using regulatory policies to restrain reckless behavior. From this perspective, central bank monetary policy should not focus solely on inflation or employment objectives but should place greater emphasis on financial stability. If Bernanke had not taken these rescue measures at the time, more financial institutions could have gone bankrupt. While the idea of too big to fail is controversial, allowing the crisis to spread could easily have led to new systemic financial risks. Bernanke's actions aimed at preventing the collapse of the financial system. Rational risk-taking was seen as essential for material progress in Greenspan's eyes, but irrational exuberance exposed the shortcomings of this notion. Everything has two sides. On one hand, the flexible policy rates introduced during Greenspan's tenure and financial innovation to some extent created a favorable financial environment for the U.S. economy. On the other hand, excessive financial liberalization also led to irrational exuberance. Greenspan describes his judgment this way: "I do not mind my predictions going wrong." However, reality can be harsh, and over-reliance on predictive models can potentially delay the effectiveness of monetary policy implementation and lead to missed opportunities. Today, the Federal Reserve continues to carefully manage the relationship between high inflation and financial stability, while the dynamic changes in the financial environment prompt a re-evaluation of the effectiveness of financial regulatory frameworks. Therefore, central banks need to continuously reform themselves, optimize monetary policy frameworks, and strengthen financial regulatory systems. The author believes that central bankers should identify troubling financial risks and calmly request that banking giants address these risks. In comparison, Bernanke, while not flawless, had his merits, and Greenspan had his strengths. However, central banks at different times should fulfill their roles and responsibilities. From this perspective, Greenspan's statement that, "we really do not know how the monetary system works," carries an ironic undertone. Every central banker may have their limitations, and the convictions they held at one point in time may only be effective during that period. With changing circumstances, adhering to the same beliefs may lead to errors. Volcker, Bernanke, and Greenspan were no exceptions. Therefore, the effectiveness of modern central banking systems remains critical. Strengthening financial regulation and bringing non-bank financial risks into regulatory purview has become the consensus of major central banks worldwide. Alright, the above summarizes today's content. Congratulations, you've finished another book. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you all, goodbye.